Welcome, everyone, to the Real News Network. My name is Maximilian Alvarez. I'm the editor-in-chief here at the Real News, and it's so great to have you all with us.
And I'm Mansa Musa, co-host with Eddie Conway of Rattling the Bars. And as well, it's great to have you with us today.
The Real News is an independent, viewer-supported, nonprofit media network. That means that instead of relying on corporate cash and billionaires, we need each one of you to invest in the work of our journalists so that we can strengthen and expand our coverage of the voices and issues that you care about most. So please take a moment to click the link in the show notes or head on over to therealnews.com/support and become a monthly sustainer of our work. And thank you so much to all of you who are supporters already. As the U.S. barrels towards a high-stakes round of midterm elections that are set to take place on Tuesday, November 8th, voting rights advocates around the country continue to sound the alarm about widespread voter disenfranchisement. Recently, in the state of Florida, onlookers have been shocked and horrified by viral stories of formerly incarcerated people being arrested and charged for voting. As Amy Sherman reported in September, quote, after much debate in 2018, Floridians decided to amend the state's constitution so certain felons, once out of prison, could regain the right to vote. Floridians were persuaded that felons who did not commit major crimes such as murder or sexual assault should have a say in issues that affect everyday life. 4 years later, some felons are finding themselves facing charges again, this time for voting. About 20 people have been charged with false affirmation in voting or elections and voting as an unqualified elector in the 2020 election. And keep in mind, this was written in September. These are third-degree felonies, and convictions can lead to 5 years in a Florida prison. So far, 19 of the 20 have been arrested. Some of the people arrested say they thought they could register to vote and participate in elections. Quote, I don't really understand. How did I commit fraud? Leo Grant Jr., a 55-year-old Palm Beach resident, told the Miami Herald and Tampa Bay Times. I don't understand any of this stuff. End quote. What do these heartbreaking arrests mean for the state of voting rights in Florida? What effects will they have on voter turnout in general and on the lives of formerly incarcerated voters themselves? And what can people do to push back?
Here today to talk about this, we are honored to have Representative Anna Eskamani. Representative Anna Eskamani is Florida State Representative representing the 47th District in Orange County. Welcome, Representative Eskamani.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, let's just open the door and unpack this. Educate our listeners and the viewers on what is going on in Florida as it relates to the voting rights and more specifically the rights of returning citizens.
Well, let's start from the beginning. I think it's important to set the stage for folks to understand that Florida has one of the largest incarceration populations in the country. In fact, it can be even compared to other countries, just the number of people we incarcerate, often on nonviolent drug offenses. And of course, when you visit state prisons like I do, you'll also see that the majority of those who face incarceration are going to be people of low wealth and or people of color. And there's a huge disparity among Black men being most impacted. And you see that same impact in the juvenile system as well. So we have a serious issue when it comes to mass incarceration and not looking at other interventions to support people who might be going through a crisis, to prevent them from having to enter the judicial system. Now, with that context given, under our past governors, we actually saw automatic restoration of rights, meaning that once someone served their time, they were able to actually have their rights be restored and be a voter again, which we know is a really key component of someone being made whole again. The ability to serve your time, go through rehabilitation, and then be able to find a job, find a home, restart your life, and vote are essential characteristics of being a fully productive member of American society. And yet, under Senator, then Governor Rick Scott, and of course, Governor Ron DeSantis, that type of automatic restoration has come to an end. It is nearly impossible for someone to restore their rights in Florida. And that was until we had Amendment 4. And for those who remember, Amendment 4 was a statewide ballot amendment led by the citizens. It was a petition drive. Organizations like Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, ACLU, and others were big partners in making this happen. And to make a long story shorter, Floridians passed Amendment 4, which allowed for the restoration rights, as was mentioned in the introduction. But then you fast forward to the Florida legislature. Lawmakers, predominantly led by the Republican Party, did not like rights restoration. They saw it as a means that would give more people, particular people of color, the right to vote, and they opposed that. So what they did was put into place what they call an implementing bill, what we call an interference bill, to then require that all fines and fees be paid off before you have your rights restored. And candidly, Florida does not even have a system for people to determine what they owe in fines and fees. And so you're already creating essentially a poll tax that predominantly impacts people of low wealth, communities of color, men, and it feeds into a vicious cycle that was already really broken. If you thought that was already bad, just wait for it, right? So the past legislative session, Governor Ron DeSantis pushes this bill that has an elections police force in it, which we already knew was super problematic and unnecessary because candidly, Florida had a very smooth 2020 election. In fact, Governor DeSantis bragged about how well Florida's elections went compared to other states. And yet, feeding into the big lie, feeding into conservative extremism, he goes through all these talking points and crafts this bill to create a police force housed under his authority, essentially. And so after this is established, the policy passes by party line vote. Governor DeSantis, a few months later, does this big press conference announcing, as was already mentioned, arrest of returning citizens, saying that they committed voter fraud. And what we are finding, which was my prediction from the very beginning, is that these were not cases of voter fraud. These were Floridians that had served their time and were given permission by the state to vote. And after they voted, not knowing what they were doing was not under the current statute or the definition of Amendment 4, they've been hunted down, essentially like entrapment, where they were given permission to vote, they voted, and now they essentially were arrested again. And it just breaks my heart when you watch the body cam footage, as I know many people have, because we're talking about elders. We're talking about folks that have served their time and they've done everything right since then. And to the point where even law enforcement were confused as why these people were being arrested. And as these cases are now going to court, one was already dismissed by a judge, but the intent of Governor DeSantis to scare returning citizens from voting and to particularly target people of color, I'm sad to say, has worked. And that was his intention all along. His intention all along was to essentially pursue voter suppression and scare people from voting.
Oh man, I'm like barely containing my rage right now because, as you mentioned, we've all seen these body cam videos of elder returning citizens who were told that they had the right to vote. Essentially, as you also mentioned, being entrapped by the state and now being rounded up and arrested for exercising that right. I mean, it really is just mind-melting how cruel this is. And I have a follow-up question about DeSantis and the voting law that you mentioned. But actually, I'm thinking before we get there, Mansa, I kind of wanted to bring you in here and kind of ask, as a returning citizen yourself, if you could talk a little bit about what Representative Eskamani said, right? Like what it means to have that fundamental right to vote in this country and what it's like for folks who are coming out of the prison system trying to navigate that journey to reclaim their full citizenship and their full personhood in a country that makes it so hard to do so.
And you know what, Max? as Representative Eskamani was, making the case about this fastest policies that's taking place in Florida, I was sitting back saying to myself, like, what are we having a conversation about a person wanting to exercise their right to be a citizen? And that's nothing more. I ain't going to the store and steal no bread. I ain't robbed nobody. I ain't hit nobody in the head. I wasn't selling drugs. All I was doing was my civic duty. And to your point, when I got out, and in the District of Columbia, they're voter friendly when it comes to returning citizens, and we had lobbied to get the rights restored. So when we get lobbied to get the rights restored, it made everybody feel like they had a sense of purpose now, that I served my time, I'm a citizen, I'm being recognized now as a model citizen, or as a citizen, because now I have a right to vote. And we was encouraging people to vote, and people was walking around, returning citizens was walking around with the stickers they give you after you vote. I voted. And at one point in time, we was like locked out of this process. But now we have this right to do it. But in 2022, to find ourselves in this place of Georgian, like Alabama, 1960, Ku Klux Klan, stalking the polls, to have us in this state of mind where now we legislate this terror and lock people up, it's beyond my imagination. And I'm my heart goes out to the brothers and sisters that thought they was doing, and doing no wrong. And I know they're traumatized by it, because all they thought they was doing was their civic duty. When is your civic duty criminal?
I think that's like so powerfully put. And to kind of go back to what Representative Eskamani was saying, I mean, like, this, what is especially, I think, sinister about all of this, right, is that it uses the pretext of protecting, democracy, right, protecting safe, voting, which, as we already mentioned, DeSantis was out there, touting, the Florida electoral process in 2020, but is now using that same process to, hunt people down for, being entrapped by this, system that is unclear, apparently, to even people working in the government. So, like, Representative Eskamani, I wanted to kind of, like, you mentioned this already, but I feel like this will now be a leading question, since we already talked about it, but I think it's worth asking, right? So, as you mentioned, back in April, Governor Ron DeSantis signed a new voting law that he and Republicans claimed would improve election security by requiring election supervisors to clean up voter rolls every year rather than every 2 years, and establishing a statewide Office of Election Crimes and Security to investigate election irregularities. Now, voting advocates, much like yourself, have criticized the law, saying it created more opportunities for voters to be wrongly purged from the rolls and intimidated by investigators from the new office. So, at the time that he signed this bill, DeSantis said, quote, 20 years ago, nobody thought Florida was a prime example of how to conduct elections. Referring, of course, to the infamous debacle in Florida during the 2000 presidential race between Al Gore and George W. Bush. But he continues, we have become a national leader by running the most secure elections in the country. So, Representative Eskamani, I guess I wanted to ask, would you agree with that assessment from Governor DeSantis?
Well, what I want to add to so much of this is that, this policy by Governor DeSantis is not only designed to scare people from voting, but it sets a tone for the future of our state, where the value of a returning citizen is less than. And the reality is, as Moss was just talking about, for our returning citizens, it's very difficult to be able to get back into everyday life and to essentially avoid, falling into pitfalls, whether it's because of housing discrimination or job discrimination. We haven't banned the box in Florida. And so we continuously are allowing these broken systems to perpetuate. and those who are most impacted are everyday people. But this is not the only time Governor DeSantis has done this, and it won't be the last. And what's super ironic is that there are situations of voter fraud in the state. For example, Florida Power and Light is the state's largest utility company. They're a for-profit company. They have been caught funding fake candidates in at least 3 different competitive state Senate races and 1 competitive House race. This is a major corporation funneling millions of dollars to prop up fake candidates that stole votes away from Democrats. They're not being held accountable at all in the state of Florida. We also have people in the villages who voted twice, many of them self-professed Trump supporters. And then you had a situation in South Florida where Florida Republican paid canvassers were knocking on the door of elders, telling them that they need to change their registration and they would check off the Republican box for them, even though they didn't ask for that. So we actually have legitimate situations of voter fraud here in the state of Florida, but Governor Ron DeSantis is doing nothing about it. And instead, he's demonizing returning citizens. He's weaponizing state agencies to go after specific communities of people. And I'm sure it's under the assumption that returning citizens are going to overwhelmingly vote a certain political way. But based on the people who were arrested, for those who've spoken to media and have shared their stories, we know that at least one of them voted for former President Trump. So it's not even accurate to say that the returning citizens vote a certain political way. At the end of the day, these are individual people who have gone through the legal system, have served their time, and deserve to be treated as human beings. And yet today in Florida, they are political props. And it's something that every person, no matter your political affiliation, should be sickened by. Because if they can do this if they can entrap one population of people, what's to stop them from doing that to other groups of people?
And Representative, speak on what we can do, what our listeners and our viewers can do to support correcting this injustice that's taking place in Florida now, and more importantly, how they can become more involved in this narrative.
Absolutely. I mean, my first recommendation is to follow Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, or FRC. This is an organization that has been founded by Desmond Meade alongside Neil Valls. These are 2 returning citizens who led the charge for Amendment 4. And right now, they've established a legal fund to help those who have been impacted by these arrests under the governor's elections police force. And so every one of these individuals has access to these legal resources. We want to make sure that's well funded and that we get these cases dismissed. But I also think it's important that for those of us who have the privilege to vote, that we vote for candidates and elected officials who don't weaponize their agencies, that don't divide us, that don't try to make it harder for people to vote, but instead unite us, instead see the power of people going to the polls, help voters become more informed, not scared. And we do have those options on our ballot this year. We can vote for people that actually see the judicial system for what it is, as something that is broken, that needs reform. Or you can vote for folks who weaponize their positions of power to maintain control. And so to really do your research, and for those who have the privilege to vote, to please vote, because there are so many others who can't. And when we make that decision at the ballot box, we're not just voting our own self-interest, we're also voting for the collective good. And we should not take that for granted.
Well said, well said.
So that is Democratic Florida State Representative Anna Eskamani. Eskamani is a member of the Florida House of Representatives representing the 47th District in Orange County. Representative Eskamani, thank you so much for joining us today on the Real News Network.
Thank you for having me.
For my intrepid co-host, Mansa Musa, who you can catch every week on Rattling the Bars, premiering every Monday on the Real News Network YouTube channel, and myself, this is Maximilian Alvarez. Before you go, please head on over to therealnews.com/support. Become a monthly sustainer of our work so we can keep bringing you important coverage and conversations just like this. Thank you so much for watching.